Hello?
Hello, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Can you repeat?
No, I was asking how people are doing this afternoon. How are we?
Number two, ni country na the US ta. Sama. Yeah, very good. Everything's going on very well.
Very good. This morning, Jeremy Purcell has joined us and he will be giving you a little demonstration.
Tari nganzu de ani Jeremy Quran nganzu de nyamju na yo rest de sambala Quran gi ani number soliya ani chikki lobzeng gi kodo dan dewe gi yan chik number ma demonstration se du sambala ani meeting gi ani lagdar dan dewe thone chegu de te yorwa o de che yores.
But before we go into that neuroanatomy or brain anatomy exercise, I wanted to check in with you about how your on-site activity went.
제자 당부 아니 피게기 원제기 꿰바나 아니 든조기 종세 만조 응외래야 안 넘버 2기 제고도 조티데 간데 간덴도 예메 당부 디직 단위 토고도 시모라.
So I want to hear from each table. Remember, your assignment was very flexible, but I wanted to find out if you were going to continue with the topic that I assigned or if you picked a new topic for your lesson plan.
제자 딜레비 삼발라 안 넘버 2야 탄다 제고 던데베 톰니 지나 제기 가르스고래. Kuyang che di ani kuyang sidu sambala ani kyoran zola genlange ma te shanjo gi changui che shinjo ge lobzen di kana mintu ne ndwa yimba ta yamena ani susu gi jushi sawa je demche di kana ndwa yimba se di ta zo ngela koran la ngode na go yus ta je khari chung yume.
So from each table, very quick.
Ani ruka re ne songro nans. Yeah, ruka re song. Suimba ruka. Ranja again like group number 2, they are continuously working on the topic they have been assigned by you.
Okay. I want to.
They are also same doing the continuing the assigned topic.
Good.
And Ruka Sumba. And group 3 also same is continuing their assigned topic, not any other.
So who is changing? Let's ask. Is anyone changing?
Tan number 2 nalone ani juishi juwa tanjo de ke yuwe sungudun juwa tan shanjo de gena korangi ma changui cheshin jo ma yimbe de gen juwa tanjo de yuwe rukan nalon. Seems no one.
Oh, perfect. So you are comfortable using the topics that I've assigned to continue to build out your lesson plans.
제가 아니 배아고레샤스 딜레디 잠발라 겐라 코랑게 창구기 차구이 제신조기 롭센 딜이야 민투네 안나버저 찰레나야라 탑데부다 아니 디기에 데바 넘버 2요레스.
So after break, we will spend some more time going through each table and what you are planning to teach and assess.
제가 아니 수제 파싱기 젤이야 아니 넘버 2기 lobzengi changwe khande na yume da telia ani chepsi khande che yume di suje percentage trade sabe jig lobjin dig na lo du sin nga zo yins.
And I'll give you a preview that today Jeremy will present on neuroanatomy, and then tomorrow Andy Kazama and I will lead 2 different examples.
That three any number sort of preview sort of gi pigela taya sort of chi kharcha de gi ore sidu sambala ani lebe gi ani pige chaku gi number jorwa anatomy chaku gi number jorwa wo du zute de che tene sanyi ne gen la quran so ge yan chi gi digi yan chi pension do da de an kha khashi jil shuya yores.
So just a reminder that while you do have the ETSI curriculum, everything is laid out for a 6-year program. What I'm asking you to do is to think creatively about what will work at your institution.
Cheza dachina number sol kare yore sudu sambala ane ngazo ETSI ge lo true gi pige lo shi ji yor was ine ya number so gi susu gi pige zula khang nano la ani lagdar khari ubi yume gi thone ani chik number so creativity tes chi khar su gore chik sadu ina re chungri ina re o tendre gi number thone ani susu khagi chambu yume gi thone chenen gi yores.
So after break, I will be looking for more examples on what you can do, how you can teach at your particular institution.
Cheza ani suje pajin satsawe jelia gena khorangi pena chashana ani kyoran so gi pege lobji gi zula gi rawe dig nano la ani khande che thu yume ani khare che we ba yume dinde gi ani pension gi thone ani number so ya ya sharo shue dinde tangi is.
So for the morning session, Jeremy is going to show us an example of a lesson he has taught.
Ani tari londu thangbu shoge gi londu thangbu delia tanda Jeremy khorangi ani lobji na shanjogi dachi gi lebe ko ba sorwa jorwa o didan ani thon ma dus songsina res.
So this can give you ideas for how to teach, but also a useful resource.
Ani di anchi karse gore ani nganzu gi lobji khande chiti chigu yeme se ate da ya di khane ya ani nganzu phige gi ani karse gore khun chosa jorwa resource chosa jorwa o dunzu tele ya yan pendo chimbu chagi yores.
So without me talking anymore, I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy.
Ta ngarangi mangbu shiya gi chable ya ani jiri lal pha du sine ani phuya yins.
Unless you have any questions.
Ani number zolia mise gi ku tiwa do de keme ba inas. Sims tiwa yu tiwa me no question.
Perfect. Okay, Jeremy, thank you.
Hello, Tashi Delek.
Hello, Tashi Delek.
So first, let me introduce myself. I can share my screen.
Tambodi gelang khora ani ngodre gi chu ngodre che gi che do intine ma ani thanda ngandu screen dingwe de ma do sin number sol chimbi is.
So I am a research scientist working at the University of Maryland at the Neuroimaging Center, and I'm specialized in human neuroimaging with MRI.
Cheza gelang khora nge milia ani Jeremy che ani zo di ani thanda wangza cheli gi dinalo lo zo phige University of Maryland che dinalo ne Neuroimaging Center se sambala ani chi wangza gi parle jorwa o di che lakba do di na ro mi lebe gi parle jorwa o tinde kalia ani chele na dinge dine is.
And my area of study is to understand how the brain represents written language using functional MRI.
Cheza da Kurangi zo karicha degi yore sidu sambala ani pena chashana pige lebe gi ko bag nalone ani ki gi chigi samsung gi number do jorwa o di ani khande yungu yume di taya dia thandanga zo ani khamle lamdar MRI machine la jo thandanga zo khanwe nyam kar nyamdar parling ni chigla gi yo o di peje tanje di chigi yores.
And in my spare time, I like to spend time outdoors, either running marathons or hiking or skiing.
Ani Quran tuju tomba yubi jelia ani tandanga zuchigi marathon gyusha loya do tende ta ani yanji rigalan roya ta ani yanji kangshu ja tende yorwa skiing cheje wo tende laga bu yes.
So as Jillian mentioned, I'm going to go through first talk about human brain navigation.
Cheza da ani genla ngutu na bana shinji tambo genla korangi karij kan keji shigin la bayin bayina nganzu joa mi lebegi ani chig navigate chena khaju judan jorwa khaju juje ta jorwa khalu judan khande khande chigi me to digan do sini chedi chenis.
And so here are the learning objectives. So first we'll start out with brain navigation in the three-dimensional standard XYZ space.
Yes, can you enlarge the screen or maybe zoom it in? Ani zo di kare sidi sambala tanda nga zo ani chokzi songi nalo ani ani chigi lebagi ani tanda pena chashan XYZ the space ka nang chui gu thone ani pige lebegi ani chagwe jorwa or that the zute navigate kadenche the dikana is.
And in doing so, we'll go over some basic terms for brain orientation and position for brain structures, including these such as dorsal and superior.
Ta dindegi ani number solia tambu ngodwe chebala ani tambu ngazu khari chegudu sidu sambala lebi pige ani chigi sagu sheda badande begin thani chigi lebi ge sagu kwa imegi ani thani mangbu jor wa hon thani keche khachi jigdu sinen dogudu pena cha shana dorsal sidu sambala ngazu ting da gap khanu ting jab nigal kondu do atine ventral sidu samba wo dandun tin thani kodu do danzu chede.
And we will go through these brain structures that I've listed here, including major structures such as the lobes and subcortical structures and specific gyri and regions.
Cheza dine ma yang anzu ani lebegi ani koba kana mandu du sambala ani kobe chega gana no pena chasna damar lebeng damari dine yung degi yorwa tene yang subcortical sidu sambala ani yang jik lebegi Lesions gi nangwe nano manzu she dig nano gi ya lebegi chache mangbu yorwa dunzo che tene yang ani chigi seju sine gyrus le de nganzu seju se tani jurdwa o tende ri mangbu shi yede ba dunzo gi koba dan tene yang ngodu chigi is.
And then we will, after that, we will discuss the basics of how to identify intact versus damaged tissue in some example brains that have a stroke damage.
Antene nganzu khari nangi yisidu sambala ani pena cha shana lebal pige gi lebe gi phundu kyun sho yo ba chigda kyun sho me ba ni ani chi ngunjin khande chegu re ngunjin chi shirim gi ngunji chena khande re se jorwa o dinzu khale ya du sinen du ins.
And then we will discuss basic approaches for mapping damage to specific cognitive functions.
Cheza da dilri sambala yang anzu dine khawal keje shegi yisidu sambala ani chi lebe sagu sheda ba chi ani kyun sho ba che ani kyun sho ba di ani chi gi satak number dawji gi thone ani di gi ani phege yang chi lebe chele ngeje shiliya ani khari kyun phogudun ani trukjun khari sogudu se jorwa ondi dante ne ani keje shegi is.
And as Jillian mentioned, this is just an example of ways to teach neuroanatomy and teach brain lesions that hopefully will give you some ideas about how to do it in your own classes.
Cheza da dilri sambala so di khari cha de gi yore sidu sambala ani chi nganzu gi lebe gi koba da daga nashin ji gi ani lebe ani nyamjun ka khande chungu yume jorwa o dunzu thedi gi ani chi gi khande chi gugu yume gi yang chi gi thalam sondo jorwa o tende da res.
So first we start out. So there is some software that I will make sure that's shared with you, but that one can download. I believe it was downloaded Computer Labs at Drepung that allows you to navigate the brain in 3 dimensions.
Cheza da tambo dele number zol khari ngodu shugu yore sidu sambala chidan dele ya de nyenche gri jores nyenche gri pejin dribungi taje khan la ma nyenche di phalim checha yores digi ani khare phendo yore sidu sambala ani lebe ge khajo di pena cha chana chozi sumgi number ga thone ani leba du sine khajo gyu che khalo gyu che ani khande du ta jorwa odi ta thu yores.
And by 3 dimensions mean that there are essentially 3 slices that allow us to see where in the brain we are.
Cheza da ani chozi sum sidu sambala ani khare lagi yore sidu sambala nganzulu pena cha shana ani pige gi ani leba pha khasha tanshan jogi semba sum do che semba sum dige gi nalo ani nganzulu lebe gi chache khawa yime thong thu ya jorwa odi cha de gi yores.
And associated with these 3 different slices is a coordinate system involving X, Y, Z. So this is a 3-dimensional space.
제자다 딜리 삼발라 카샤 당신 저기 숨 줘로 와스 아니 숨 딜이야 아니 양 안주기 두시네 페나 차샤나 초제 숨 시리 삼발라 아니 이게 아니 Y다 아니 체 X다 디네마 용구도 초제 숨고 토네 디타토고도 레레레야 어디 녜고요 레스
And
X
so
Y
the three slices are associated with the have terms called the sagittal, the coronal, and the horizontal. So sagittal, coronal, and horizontal.
제자 딜레디 삼발라 넘버 2 페나 차샤나 아니 틴데기 단당안조 레바 차시 숨노마 두스 샤샤찬조기 소조 두주텔리야 쿠란소 테다 아니 냠제 유신조기 타니 숨요레스 타니 숨 나노라 세지털 시디 삼발라 아니 싱샤 타야데체 안테네마 아니 찍디 카르시디 삼발라 아니 체샤 단조데치 horizontal din chesha dan jode che ani chigdi ya ani chusha dan jode che ni koloko na lag do chusha dan san jode do won de ani an thani sum yo res kona
And this is associated with the X, Y, Z coordinates. And so these are the coordinates that the numbers up here refer to to these coordinates in the X, Y, Z plane in this three-dimensional image.
cheza da di pari na la ten yu di zambala ani drithu gi so do bdi khar cha de gyor se de zambala x y z sine ani par na ta dang thone ani din de do ji khu zu pha ani de wa drithu so do ji ta khanda di cha de gyor res ta dang thone.
And so if I want to move in different directions, I will essentially select a different point on one of these images. Like if I want to move more anterior, so closer to the front of the brain, I will select this coordinate, and now I've moved anteriorly, and you can see that the coordinate has changed. And the only slice that's changed is this one right here, the coronal.
Ta dil di sambala pena cha shana ani thanda dilia ani nganzugi digi kurangi ani nebula pabege nganzu pha chun the phan the che andwa tan digi nalo la pena cha shana ndungwelia anterior cholia chu dus themba yimba yina dus ji di ta yun di sambala ani nganzu ani khare ha khu thugre si di sambala ani yigel kunzu gi paru gen rethu jorwa dewa jorwa di di nalo la number par di chung du dwa china di angi di yuan du yo resta khanda di ta yun di sambala.
And so there are different example brains. This one actually has the skull removed from it. And so this is another example brain that has the skull intact. And you can see here in this anterior portion here where the eyes are just inferior to the front of the brain.
Chezan da dil di sambala yan chik par ge thone number man da che pen par di do cha sha ba yin ba ina ani chik pige nganzu gi nang gi kali di ma tön san jo de che di yan chi kalu di khar se gore ani jundeng khala de en jo de che di gi nalo number so ge yan chik pen cha shin mi di ma so na de zo ani yan chi gi de zo sama se bu thong thog do as.
And so moving more anteriorly, as I'm doing now, is moving closer to the front of the brain, where you can see the eyes. And then moving to the back of the brain is moving posteriorly. So this is the posterior of the brain. And if I move up
Yes, I think the dealer is Sambalangazo, do you sue do sin in Tanguruas? Do you think you do Zambala, do you soon think you do Sambalangazo, Lebanon was in the Migi dos, and doing Mugi, and a number the Shuchimbutu say to watch it, and Tarana Shigi, Javlapan Ten do Zambala, and Lebig Yamugi in the Chashegi number Jorwa, or to Zutedia, and a such a shoot here and Tondu, the Vadichagio, yes.
And then I can move to the top of the brain, which is also called the superior portion and or the dorsal portion of the brain, all the way up at the top.
Ani kisi yang genla Kurangi serwa lebigi anything ani thandanga zu tinglia ani superior the ani dorsal sentani niga peju tangdwa delia ani dusinia ani chertan jen themba yimba inas.
And then I can move from superior, or the dorsal part of the brain, all the way down to the ventral part. And so as I'm moving inferiorly from superior to inferior, you notice that this slice, the horizontal slice, that's changing now.
Okay. That deal with Sambala penetration number so do sin any duni and do sin any and ten you do Sambala, any lebegi, piggy, chaco, and comegi, any carsor, Konya, thinly and ten to the Sambala, comegi chashi to the number steering watch, any yamat paying the Sambala, any omegi chashi to the saying watch, and Taganashiji, any Konda was an inferior citizen wall secure, demand ten to Sambala, passion tegi, any piggy, lebegi chashi number jorwa, to Zuti in Juan Tong and didn't say the yours.
So one of the things I like to do when I teach is to start at either the very anterior or superior and then move in the other direction. So start anteriorly up at the front of the brain and then slowly move to the back, and just to give students a sense of looking at the different slices of the brain. In this case, we're looking at the different slices as you move from the front all the way to the back, and to give, in a way, kind of navigating from front to back.
Okay. That deal with some penetration number so Tambu, that Galan Korangi, so any Chiki, Chen, there was all over the Karen Institute Sambala, and Lebin Dungune, any Tsun Ten you and Chick down, any Lebegi, any Anju, and Koma, Ting, any Anten you and Chick Che, the Nini Nano, Lebin Dungune, Tsun Ten you Sambala, Lebin Dungi Chashedi, and the Sebu you are Che, the name by Yellow Papa Shindu Sambala, Lebi Ting Ting Zundu Sambala, Lebegi, any Madus in the Kasha Doji, Rimba Tamba Himbaina, and the Lotun number so that Dinan on the country USA, and Chico, some of Jorwa on the Chadigi.
And we could do the same thing starting at the top of the brain, so the dorsal or superior portion of the brain, and then going inferiorly. And you can look down here at the horizontal slice to see it changing.
Okay. That Tagana did the Chiwich Yang Azu Kariche to your residue Sambala, and then Anzu Lebegi, any Chashi Koma, any Komada, Tingma. Or that the name ma and dun ma do stay in the Sambala, and in Anzo Parendina Yan Tanjigi, Tanjipige Ton and Shinji, in Tingi Chashi and the ma dusma, Yanchi Kasha Tambison Doji, Chashi Ringi, and Sebuton and the numbers on J2 URS.
And then we can also look at the left and right. So this is the left side of the brain, right? And we can move all the way to the right side of the brain. And here we're looking at the sagittal slices as they change.
Okay. Tagana Shinchik and Anzuchi Kariche to your residue Sambalaya, Lebegi, Pigi, any show in a Domchi, Yamane, any Kalekaleso, Yabachulu, you and do singing Tagana Shitanjita and the Chibaji and Tatigures, and Tanda Dido Chashawaina, Lebi, Inema Kasha Tandandi, and a Shingsha Cheshin Jogi, Shingsha Tanshin Jogi, and the Lebig number the Chadigures.
And so, we like to look at the brain in these different views because some regions are more clearly seen in certain views than others, and they can look quite different. For example, the hippocampus, which hopefully you remember, in the coronal view you can see it right here, and it looks like this kind of circle right here. But in the sagittal view, it looks like this long tube structure right here. And so depending on what view you're looking at, the structure might look very different. And so in order to understand neuroanatomy, you need to know the structures in all of these views.
Chezanda dele sambala chidang anzu ane lebegi dusine ane tadangi ane chik mandawa mangbuyor tadang thone ke dan tadang thone ke je sheba yimba inas ta dinde jig nalo ta yundi sambala pena chashana ane nganzu ane chigi tadang nolo ma ta yundi sambala ane lebegi phigegi nangwegi tubja du juten thona mandawa manda yung digi wada che so dinalo tanda nga zo khamzi lesion dawje teba ina dinalo dinde dawje dodo dawje thongu duwas ta dinalo la shingsha ta shanju dig nalo la thongdu sambala yang khut ani chik kharsu gore chik narman daw yung jogi dinde gi namba thongu duwas di indu sambala ta nga zo chik lebe gi phige ani chashe duzo ani ma ta indu sambala yang kho chik ta dang go thone ya namba menda wa yung jorwa oda duzo chede yang shingu go yore sig.
And I think an important point is that the goal of this is not necessarily to help with the memorization of all of these structures. That's of course important as you work with brain structures, but the important thing is to learn how to navigate and get used to looking at the brain in these different ways and being able to find these structures and know how they relate to each other spatially.
Okay. Ta dilari sambala ta ke chimbuji khari chagi yo mare sidi sambala ani chigi duzo ta chene ani dunzu tede ge koba duzo tede sama chig nganzu lunzi che jorwa tinde ke chimu mare chinanda lunzi che duzo ke chimbure de ine da dig ani go rewa jagi yo mare so khari sidi sambala ani chigi lebe ge tadang dus to ne ta yin du sambala tadang mandawa to ne ta yin du sambala ani chigi pigi lebe ge chashin didan di re se ge nganzu chi ngunzi che tuye jorwa ta zu shin ye jorwa ta zu tadang mandawa to ne ni shadang mandawa to ne da di kande reshi se ngunzi che jorwa di haku tuye kwe di ani tanda nenga daw cha digi yo res so.
And so another couple terms that are worth knowing are when you're near the middle of the brain. So this is called a mid-sagittal slice. This is called medial, and then outside on the left or right is called lateral. So lateral and medial.
Lateral and medial. Okay. Ta yang number 2 du sine ne nganzu ani du sine chikta yunde sambala ta dang ge thone pena cha shana ani kima dawal tawa yimba ina ani medial sidu sambala chu chi gi number dire ani lateral sidu sambala show gi number dire show yuni se jorwa o di yang koran zu thani gi mandawa thone ya tinde chik ta dang jores.
So for example, the hippocampus and surrounding structures are often referred to as the medial temporal lobe because they're on the medial side of the brain. They're not on the lateral, they're in the medial portion of the temporal lobe.
Temporal lobe, okay. Ta pena cha shana khari cha yung yore sidi sambala nganzu gi enin sokda manda wuji le teba yimba inas. Anin sokda madi ani zu lebe ki cha she ni gi nalo ne sho da ki ni nalo keje she yundu sambala ani chik naton da me gi ani ki cha lu yudun jo. Nganzu temporal lobe sidi sambala nganzu nama lagi yo di ki cha lu yudun jo de cha gi yo res di khare sidi sambala an lateral sho gi ani cha she khonduru tangi yo ma res kwa yu me gi nalo ne.
So before we get into specific structures, I just wanted to point out a few kind of basic structures that you can see here, including the cortex, or the gray matter, where the cell bodies are.
Ani taya number so ani dinema ani chigi dinema ngotre ani ma manju khonlia so dawdi number so liya chik pigi shirimingi lebegi ani chagwe gashi jig dusine ngodu chigi yes tangbodi khar cha de yore sidu sambala cortex sidu sambala lesion dig nano la ani chigi wanza angi ani wanza gi tanda thasu du jutede cell body lufung du jutede kawanne yemi du cha de yores.
And then the white matter, which has the myelinated axons that connect the cell bodies of, say, cortical regions to cell bodies elsewhere in the brain.
Taga na shinji ani dine pha teng du sambala ani tada ngazu dine ma pena cha shana ani chigi axons da ani dilia nganzu ani myelin gi tanda myelin din thani chi gyuro tangi thema so ti ko tum shen ju penzi gi tum shen ju jorwa o du te de yores du ke chemo cha yong yores penzi ina chila.
So essentially this is the wiring areas in these white areas is where the wiring is that connect different regions of the brain.
Did you say the white or the wider?
The white.
White, white. Tanda dizute de any carre to sambala kaze nganzo kaze the kaze sigi yorwa and kaze gi any sagu zu chandi yores tuzute di any zo carre to sambala a leba pagi any sagu chik manda wala pha and tuka le din yorwa tunzam tuka connection mambu yedin yorwa mudi chadi yores.
And this is a major white matter structure that we can see here called the corpus callosum that connects the two hemispheres, so the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere.
Ta dila de sambala da duzu te so khare cha de yore se de sambala ani chigi ka tananga zo ana jaze da kaze se kaze shu chesa de yore cha de yores kaze shu chesa yose dig na lo la khari yore se le de sambala an domshi ye na yu ni gi paru la an thuga thenge gi ngazo ani corpus callosum se de sambala sa shun se yore sa shun ine jile o di inde cha de yore sa shun la de sho domshi yu ni gi pa thuga je de sa shun de yores.
And so you can see the corpus callosum in this view, in the coronal view, and also in the sagittal view, You can see it's more of a C-shaped structure in the sagittal view here.
다 number 2 dinano ane dinano da tu sas da dinano la tanda nganzu ani jigi sashun gi thona te dans ani dinano la tanda shingsha gi ani sashun gi thona de ni te inde sambala di an jigi si gi sobdan da wuchi yang thona manda yung de gi inju sashun yin ba chi ba che da thona shingsha gi thona ta dang thona manda yung de number manda yung du wa. Yes.
And so another important white matter structure that's actually an important landmark that was used in the first brain mapping studies.
Okay. 다 number so chi ke chimo 가르쳐 연구 요래 시디 삼발라 단다 까제 조르와 까제 de ke chajo 가르쳐 연구 요래 시디 삼발라 아니 chi 레베기 아니 파 parlendu sambalas parlensa ge tapena chachana nga jo sata na maso na landmark do jorwa sata na maso na di ani phuje ta ge sata ge chui do di ani kene chechu chikdi tanda nga jo lebe pha ani parlendu sambala sata so do di sata so do di di cha de ge res.
So there's this structure here called the anterior commissure. And
anterior what?
Anterior commissure.
Commissure, okay. Da delia ani khari yore sidi sambala ani chigi lebegi ani chashi yore chashi dil min khale yore sidi sambala an doingi tuza lag yore commissure la den tuza su yore da namazo doingi tuza.
And this structure was, in the first brain mapping studies, was thought to be in this coordinate system at about where the 0, 0, 0 point. So this was a central part in the brain that people used as a landmark. And you can see this line right here. So you can see this band right here.
Da dile di sambala di kharre sidi sambala pena cha shana ane nganzu gi lebe gi sata lindu sambala tanji nga jun rintu gi thone chiba imba ina ta lego yosa dires ta kanda kima yosa dires chikcha yosa de di indu sambala ane lebe pa lindu sambala di ane chigi phige gi sata gi chawa dawu zimsa kima dawu zimgi yorwa o zinsab di landmark dawu di tanda nganzu ane di cha di yor da ndungi tuzala do o di cha di gi yores.
Okay. So we'll get back to this structure in a moment, but first I want to talk about the lobes of the brain and review that. And we can do this just by looking at the brain, but there is actually some nice colorful overlays that we can look at.
Chezanda number so ani thande ani lebe ge kwaba du thede ani jail chu lo yong ge di maje ngwelia ani number so lia cho khari yin ngodu che gu yo se di sambala an lebe ge dama du thede kya jung gu chu do sin pyeju ta yin chida ani thanda di na lo ke je she yorte thanji di pyeju dan je she yorte ina ya ani delia ta chigi chigin swendo ya message ta sha je tinde ge number thone ma ani shuya us.
And so with this program, and there are other programs out there that have a similar function, you can add a map which gives the colors of the different, in this case, structures, in this case, the lobes. So in red, we have the frontal lobe.
Ta number so taringi ni nganzogi karisogore tanda ETSI thoni bare temai bele ja shemba yimba inare ani da dig na la ani chig sane khuzu suzu le ya ani khari che yore sidi sambala ani chig sunda ta che chashi suzu le tande ni cha cha wanan dung dabla ani chashi an sunda ta che ani dig sa dia sundo tende che yores.
And so it's also helpful to look at what's called a side profile or of the brain. So besides looking at the slices, so this right here is a view of the brain where we're looking at it from the side. We've taken the skull away and we're just looking at the side of the brain.
Cheza da di kharcha gi yore sidi sambala thanji nganzo ge leba ta ma che di ani ma ani chik sesha ta che dig ta di cha de gi yor was ta di na no khari che yore sidi sambala pena cha shan nganzo kabali daw de ma tu ani surni te che lebe ge chilo gi sune ani number te che ani ta yin de sambala nganzo na wa jung gi yor wa leba cha na jung gi yor wa o di ta thone ta thu gi yor res sha ma go wa che.
So we can see the frontal lobes in red, the parietal lobe in blue. the temporal lobe in yellow, and the occipital lobe in green.
Cheza dile sambala pena chashina dinalo langanzu ani dundub di ani mabu nalo yedewache ani parietal lobe sidu sambala chungdub di tananganzu ngomu nalo yewache ani tangdub occipital di tananganzu jangu nalo yewache tinema ani temporal lobe sidu sambala nakdam damalagi yo nangdab on di ani tanda sebu di nalo yewadiris.
And then we have, of course, the cerebellum back here at the base in the posterior portion of the brain.
Cheza dile sambala dine nganzu kari yores sidu sambala cerebellum se lenyi di ba ani wo de lenyi di de yores.
And so other major structures include the ventricles, which are these large black areas in the middle of the brain, which have cerebral spinal fluid that helps to, that is the extracellular fluid around the neurons.
That helps what?
That is the cerebral spinal fluid, includes the extracellular fluid, so all the fluid around that surrounds the neuron and surrounds the brain.
Okay. Antene yang anzuchi karta yore sidu sambala an ventricle sidu sambala manchel dir khungsha ina se judu sams khungsha ina stani di jursha sams ventricle number chikta darwa an dig nalola khari yo thung thu yore sidu sambala yang chi extra chik shigi ani lebegi ani khachi lemara thabungi ani chik shigu sunda ujorwa onda duzu ten number suri thu re se sir.
So I will close this and now go back to the original brain. And next I want to go again to near the medial and central portions of the brain and go revisit that anterior commissure structure because.
Okay. Ani dine ani anjo nganzo kawala tagi in situ sambala tanji lebegi ani kigi ani pige kweba yosa dine tawache dia ani tanda nganzo tandi ani kigi tanda nganzo diwa an dugin tuza sejwa on dig chone ma dosine ani tayong ins anterior commission light.
Yeah. So we went over a lot of the very basics of the cortex and by discussing the lobes. And now I want to discuss a few key subcortical structures.
Okay. Tan number so da khare sidu sambala ani tharing anzo ani chigi pigegi lebegi kharsogore ani chishungi thone ani chagwe du zutede nganzu rarwin chine do sine do yeres ta dine ma ani khawal zundugi sidu sambala ani lebegi ani tanda mige chishungi nangwe jorwa nangwe gi tupcha kweba khashi jorwa ole shungi ani tanda nangwe gi kweba tinde tupcha khashi kweba khashi nan dine ma anzu do ins.
And so the anterior commissure is this white matter tract that connects two key regions that are known to be associated with emotional processing, especially fear. Does anybody know what those are?
Initial processing?
Yeah, emotional
processing. Okay.
Especially with fear, and it connects them.
Okay, got it. Okay. That deal is sambala tanda nganzu ani tanda dungi sirwa ani tuzadnes ani tanda dinema ani kogi tuga draudi ani senyum dan dewa yushinjogi lebe chashe keche khashe danyam de tuga yores and duzu tedi number zo tudin sugu dues senyum dan dewa yushinjogi lebe chashe amygdala. Yes, some of them said amygdala.
Correct. So this connects the bilateral amygdala. And so it's hard to trace it, but if you trace the anterior commissure, it projects down into the amygdala here. This is the right amygdala right here.
Cheza dile samba tagara res ta nganzo dine chu ani dungi zantu gi du cinema an tem di samba la tanda nganzo ani show yegi an tanda nganzo ani kalsegore kamze leshu o di du cinema ba thong de res.
So you can see these white dots are parts of the anterior commissure projecting into either the right or the left amygdala.
Cheza that the ladies ambala number sogi ani dine man thusam dini gi dus the kabu dawjik dusine yini gal tangdwa yin thuga yubi son dawjdo the yudi sambala ani shoy yini gi kamzil neshule ya and dusma thu de yubi son dawjik on the res.
And so another important structure is just posterior, again, moving posteriorly, is this structure right here. Does anybody know what this is?
Cheza yan number zo chago keche ji khar chade gi yore sidu sambala ani zo de yan chik posterior sidu sambala gyab gi chogi ani yoden yogi ani koban de jores the chago number de jor di number zo sukange ngegi dues hippocampus. Some of them said hippocampus.
Correct. Yeah. And so just posterior to the amygdala is the head of the hippocampus. And it is this tube-like structure in the sagittal view.
Ani da tagaran khare residu sambala thanda nganzu kamze leshun gi ani gyabngu gi gyab gi cholo yu da amygdala gi gyab cholo yu den yogi ani kamze kharsa gor thanda nganzu choda ma de chade gi yores tinde gi choda ma gi nansu de ani nganzu ani shingsha gi thone tadang gi ani number de chade gi yores.
And just as it's a bit more advanced, but if you follow the hippocampus all the way back, and keep going posteriorly, there's another white matter structure associated with it called the fornix that is the white matter connection of the hippocampus. And you can see the white matter structure here. This is the fornix.
Tayan number so Tagana Shik Tadachidan Tananga Zuchegi, Katadangi, Rimban Masuna Kala Kanzbian, advanced tablet Savache, Tine Mayanjo, Ani Chigi, Kamzation Dusma, Jamma, Dusma, Teche, in the Sambala, and Nazuchi Karaton to your residue Sambala, and a Kaze, and a Kaze Tea, and a Kari residue Sambala, and a hippocampus Lapa, and a Tugache, Dedi, the Batindic, number 2 to your rest.
You can see it here, and then you can also see it here. So we have the corpus callosum right here, and then here is the fornix. That is that white line that goes right underneath it around the thalamus.
So this one is the fornix?
The fornix. This comes from the hippocampus.
Okay. Tadi ani number so di nganzu kharisha sidu sambala ani thanda nganzu ani sashun diche sashun dine ma ani thanda di number so di nanola thongtu yore di nanola thongtu yores di kharire sidu sambala ani nganzu choda mane ma ani narshan yogi tindi jigresha tanthani dingi thema so phone kharina o di nanola thongtu yores.
And so if you damage the hippocampus or damage the fornix or damage where it projects to, you will have difficulty forming new memories because it's part of a larger system.
Ta number zu pena cha shana ani chigi hippocampus la ani mejuin po wan thola chim bayin bayin na re ta gan shi hippocampus na ma chang shin jogi phonics le dilan trujin sha bayin bayin na re di yun dilan trujin sha bayin bayin na an number zo le ani shenja ji khari yung yo re sidu sambala ani themba sawa sonju che thu yo ma res da duzu te samadi dan dewa cha de yo res.
And so as I said, the fornix here, so it comes up here, and then you can see it wrapping here. You can see the fornix right here. And you can see it coming down. It goes around the thalamus.
Goes around the what?
Thalamus.
Thalamus, okay. Okay. Ta number so dus ani teba yimba inas tanda nganzo ani hippocampus ne ma chigi rajo so doji ma nar de yungu dua di dus ne te che ya an dine so teba yimba ina an di kharidi ki chil kora jam ne dugu yore kharigi koran doji kharil koran doji jade yode la ba yimba ina ani nganzo lebu yoro thalamus yoro on dil dus ne ani pha ani korate debe son doji kan yores.
And so the thalamus is considered a relay station between the sensory systems and the cortex, and between different areas of the brain. So it's a central relay station.
다 딜레디 삼발라 아니 간주 레부디 가르차데기 요레 시디 삼발라 아니 치기 왕소기 다 리슌기 나롱게 왕소 망부 시비지다 아니 레베 차제 셴바드 파츠 니주 땅사기 아니 치 사지디 마소나 니주 파츠 주동체사기 간주 사지 조르와 밥시 소도 조르와 온다 칸다 릴레이 스테이션 오디 안 차데기 요레스 상마단 제와 요르와 코
And there are two other subcortical structures I think it's worth mentioning here, including the basal ganglia, and so this is part of the basal ganglia called the caudate.
아니 단도 디네 양치기 리슈 난기 차시 양 개체지 아니 넘버 솔디 슈슈여바지 차시지요레스 디 가르차 되기요레스 디 삼발라 아니 베이슬 갱글린 시디 삼발라 가조 페지 레숍 잔두이네 수주요레 디 차되기요레스 레숍 잔두.
So this is the caudate and the putamen, and so these are different parts of the basal ganglia, and they're important for what's called procedural memory or habit memory.
Habit memory, procedural, okay. 아니 드주체디 넘버 속에 아니 단다 베슬리 갱글링기 차시 소도부체 아니 니 통디기요레 조디 카르레 시디 잠발라 아니 체기 간주 콤디 단제베기 아니 템바지요르와 콤디 단제베 아니 안치 코 칼레 락다기 토니 체고야기 단다 간주 템바리 소야지요르와 디다 딜케 쳔부차디기요레스.
And just inferior to the head of the caudate is a region that has been associated with pleasure and positive feelings. Does anybody know what that structure is?
아니 단다 간주 아니 단다 레슈 잔두기 차시직 밍따소 디기 인두기 초레야 아니 양치 간주 초와 디기 troaleanda chigi dewaleangi tende dan anen dewa yeshin jogi lebi chashi jures and the number so ani sukangi ngi du wes tengi du wes tengi du maybe reward system.
It is the reward system, and it's a key area in it that has dopaminergic projections. Does anybody remember the name of it?
다 디나노라다 제기 간조 냠바테 인디 삼발라 가난레 데야기 텐데기 치 도파민 로사 텐데 슈셴보 조레스 티 사구디기 밍리아 넘버 소기 안 수칸게 넘버 소기 투덴 수구 두웨스 hippocampus hypothalamus, some of them said hypothalamus. Dimaris
it's the nucleus accumbens.
Karsa
Pijum
stratum.
Yes, the ventral striatum, exactly.
That is stratum led rest, stratum.
Here's the dorsal striatum is what we were talking about, and then the ventral striatum, which has the nucleus accumbens, is important for reward processing.
제가 디나노라 단당한주 아니 jabgi segurwa doing ventral sidisama doing ani henshuin diores da di kharcha de giore sidisama ani kharil keche muchagi yore la bayima ina tanda nganzo chi towa da ngimbal chi gi yorwa on dinde gi dewa yeshin cha de giores.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so there I can spend all day just going through subcortical structures. But let's now discuss some more details of the outer gyri and sulci in the cortex.
That deal with somebody Gela Korangi, Piggy, Linshin, Nangu, Nanola, Keje, de Devina, Nimaninga share yours. In a that Dimajeva Cheche, and the name Anzuchigi and Chigi, Pineso, Ane Sejuta, Suda. Ani lesion gyris resemble sijuche ani sulcus said the su ladiche ani dinema cortex lad lesion ho dina kan an chaje zunama kan ke shegins.
And one of the first ideas to emphasize when teaching this is that the cortex is all is compressed up, and that's what all these wrinkles are, and that you can spread it out to see more clearly. the outer cortex. So this is where it's scrunched up. And this is actually a view of the brain where we spread it out a bit. And so we can see inside all of these sulci.
That in the Sambala, Anzo, any chiki lebeki, piki, chishin pa, dos day in the Sambala, any chick dos in a pa, Nara menjos on roads, the Kanda Kares in the Sambala, chiki, Dualam, Burundun, Budun Sondo with the Rimambu Shiviji, you want to us. That D Kares in the Sambala, and a ding on the Dinan the two Kacheche, and Nano gives Sud to Kande Kande Yume, and it's Hamata Tuegi, and never Zigana dos in a Chadi or rest.
And so I've put this overlay, which I made, which shows some important sulci and structures. And
Tanda Gela Koran get to Shanjogi, Tanda China, and a nuted tending you say, so the overlaps in the Sambala, Kanda, the Chashi Mambush Tendua, or the Zutedigi Carre, Sidu Sambala, Tanda Ganzo, any Tanda Sudan, the Zutedigi, any Chashi Kecha, Dawsi.
And one important sulci is the central sulcus, you can see in green right here, and then also in green right here.
Tanda Dina on the Suin on the Kechi, Karchadi Yoris, number to Dinema, Sideagi, Kisudiris, Kisujorwa, Kilsul, on the D, any Dinana Tondi Yore, and numbers of Dinano, State Wores, Leviki Chick Governor, Chisu.
And you can also see the sulcus here. So the dark parts on this view of the brain is where the sulcus is, and the light parts are where the gyri are.
Chezanda number two, and Dina audition you did not teba imbaina, and in Zupena Chashan, Nagotation you do the Carre City Sambala, and a Sugi number the che, and the Cabo does the current Sungu Yores in the Sambala, and then to say you number the Sundi Yores, say you.
And so does anybody know what to, so there's two important gyri and actually two important lobes that this sulcus separates, so the central sulcus. So what two lobes does it separate?
Chezanda number two, any Kari Dihaku West, Dan Delia, any Seju Keche and Yores. Chida ani anchigin damal kechawai dan dama kech dan dama ni dojin ba ina pena chashana ani kisu dinema an damba pha ani pha separate chinge kha chinge gi tinde jores the d in numbers of kari me the hago us dama duzu pha zo kha chinge jorwa yensam cheguro an dama shi yorwa duzu de yensam chinge jorwa da dina keche gi ani seju son ro tinde yor dikhare lag yor yinjuda Hagu Westi. Tenda go to Masway. And then Dunda the Sundup, that digi yensam change or a di. Coronare. So one of them said that it is the actually parietal lobe and frontal lobe that really separates between them two.
Correct. So there's the frontal lobe just anterior to the central sulcus, and then the parietal lobe is just posterior to it.
Cheza and frontal lobe city zambalan dan dundo di tagara and pigela di Karisigoran doing cholo yobache. Ani yanchi ki parietal lobes tundo di yanko jab cholo suyo din yoche tinini pa enzam singen out.
Does anybody know the two important gyri that are separated by the central sulcus? And you get bonus points if you can say what their function is.
That the lady sambala pena chashana number sogi any tanda dingazo chisu juduas. Dini ya di pa yenje tange gi yensam jenge gi seju chega ni yores seju chega ni de hagu yores seju jaris ni yor jari ni yores ane do di ane kurang ge dile ya ane samuta ane samdi chele le samuta na ya chikjena an haku dores guju ngarum nation premotor cortex.
So one of them is the primary motor cortex, the precentral gyrus. So that's this one right here. Yeah.
The dinner chi khar cha de gyor sit sambala in prime motor cortex sit sambala thanda nganzu nguju ngarim ki lagorwe ta khanda lesion se sondo cha de gyores.
And then what is the gyrus that's just posterior to the primary motor cortex? What is its function?
Chezanda dile sambala pena cha shanas ani thanda nganzu anu guju ngarim gi lesion gi jablo yeshin jogi ani gyrus thanda di seju jor was digi ani chele khar cha gyores ta yeve chele yeve how go so Gujul Tanzi Chigre. One of them said actually that gyrus regulates the movement, the function.
So that's the motor cortex.
The
That's
motor
in
cortex.
the frontal lobe.
The motor cortex kona the ani tananguju linshu ran cha de gyores. The khawali yores di zambala ani yanching dundab gi linshu na la yeting cha de gyores. Yes.
So any other thoughts on what's posterior?
And one of them said somatosensory.
That is correct. Yes, this is so the body touch is here in this gyrus here, posterior to the central sulcus, and then the body motor is just anterior to that.
Cheza dele di zambala pena cha shana nganzu ani subu gi ani ritu gi chowa jorwa o duzu chedi ani thanda nganzu chisu gi ani jab do chisu gi posterior to la so jab do chikda an thig thi thagaran thele ya ani nganzu ani nguju ngarim gi linshin du yores.
And an important concept from learning about these is that there is a body map, such as here you would have the motor and the somatosensory for the face in this portion, and then for the hand is up here. And so there is a body map, face and...
Okay. That did koto de jango gi nenga chembuji kharchine chagi yore sidu sambala ani deli yang anzu pena cha shaba imba ina ani chegi anguju gi di drebe gi lesion du yawache de susho de la khari yore sidu sambala ani chegi dongba gi drebe gi ani anzu ani chegi dongba gi dan drebe gi chegi luso gi chashi gi lesion jorwa de yores and di geblo dine ya du sambala yan chegi lakwa dan dinde dan dewa lesion jogi ani chegi luso gi lebi gi lesion dan dewa jorwa o du de cha de yores.
And one important concept that was brought up actually about the premotor cortex is just anterior to the primary motor cortex.
Okay. Tanda di yanchik number 2 sugo chil khari chadu sil sambala ani premotor cortex sidu sambala tanda pena cha shana tanda ngazu primary motor cortex gi gorwa ani chingarim gi nguju linshun chik che di yanji piri sidu sambala tingun gi yanchik nguju linshun di khawa yore sidu sambala an di ndun chori ya yode gi yores.
And I brought up this concept because I think it's a great example of looking at the more advanced motor processing. And so does anybody know if I lesion, what happens if I lesion this part of the brain just anterior to the motor and touch areas for the face?
Ta number zo genla korangi tanda digi yanchi koto de zo kiyung go de zo karin yisi de sambala ani nganzung gujo dan de big nizuma this jeep shift haran do chik shedo yung ate dan chik ches tene ani ya number zo lebe chashe dowa jil dadi khare yisi de sambala ani tanda nganzung guje gi den shun da ani tanda nganzo ani chik luso gi ani ante big len shun ni gi ani dyun gi dwala ani lebe gi kyun shoba imba ina ani khare chagi yores nyamjung khare kharan do yore di number zo ha ko tu do es Chiwakosan. Chiwakosan. That would Karichi Tumarsa? That way, but the Dalim Bachatumares. Number two minus. Okay. So if someone has a damage at this region of the brain, then that individual will not be able to communicate and comprehend the language statements.
So they will primarily have an issue with spoken production, with actually producing speech. Yes. They might be able to understand some, but will have a particular difficulty with production. And it's thought to be related to the fact that the motor and touch areas of the face are just right next to it. And so this is associated with the higher, more complicated motor and articulatory outputs from the mouth and articulators.
Ta dig nano la ani zo di khare sidu sambala ani jeba tuyen jorwa ani jeba tuyen la ani thanda nga zo chi ki nyamje yong de che ani anji ko noyen la tege zi nyamju shira yung mebe sodo buji ta khanda ani zo ma jeba tuyen la kala the de cha de gi yores ta chi khar chen re sidu sambala di pena cha shana nga zo dongba ge luso le de che di ani ngarem gi ani kharsu gore nga zo di ngujo dan rewa che da dina le yu sambala chi ngujo gi ri yan che gi nyongzi che ri jo rwa tuzu the gi ani rewa yu sa cha yu di sambala delan tu jin showa yin ba ina ani nga zo jeba trin chi ta da che go jo rwa o tuzu the yan di ta da yong mu to di cha de gi res.
We will revisit this idea when we look at some brain lesions. But next I want to go through some other structures including this yellow fissure called the lateral fissure. You can see here separating the frontal and the temporal lobe.
Ta number zo ani tanda di ani chida ani hanju jelia ani tanda de chulo yong yes ine tanda number ke sawa ji she gudus sheba de khari she gudus de sambala tanda ngazu di fissure se di an tani de soups yudu samsta sul se de soup le de khagarda sarda sa ju soup ba soup le de khagarda di jursha ani di che di zo de yan ching dun da di ni gyam ni ge parul dama ni ge parul ani chi yen sam che ge ani samje ge ani chi ge sazi so do jre do.
And so let me close this, and then I will overlay another set of colors, which has more detail for some different gyri that are important.
Ta number so tanda di nano la ani chonda tangsha ju di nano zo khare yore sidi sambala ani chi ge seju mandra wa che di nano la seju ke che ha da zu the de ani choyong ton ton shin ju di cha de gyo res jara seju de zu the de.
And I think, so there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of different gyri. I think there's a few important concepts that I want to orient you to.
Ta number so ani chidan di nano la da che gi seju ri mangbu shiwi che ani naga mangbu shiwi cha de gyo res di nano ne ani gen la gi chonan so le ya da che gi kharse gore
So
keche khashe ji gi ani jar seju keche khashe ji do cinema ani niti so do che do cinema is.
So we already went over the pre and post-central gyrus. These have the motor and somatosensory homunculi. Anterior to the motor are the superior, middle, and inferior frontal gyri.
Okay, da nganzo tan din nalo la seju ke che ni chimbare sta zo de khare sidu sambala tanda dig nalo ane nganzo che ge seju ge nalo ane ching guju dan dewa te da ane chi ya luso dan dewa yeshin jogi an du sin chimbare ta dine man dun ma ke je shin du sambala yan chi seju ne superior sidu sambala ane tema da khongwa se jo o te dan dewe ton du sma shu gi sti par chik che be son do chesta.
And so both the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe have these three gyri: superior, middle, inferior. Superior, middle, inferior.
Okay. Dirisha da inju ta number so dirisha tanji chenjo de ani dundab tas ani tanda nganzo nandab jora temporal niga la khari yore sidu sambala ani tanda nganzo seju ani tema superior, anterior, could you repeat the superior, anterior,
Superior,
gyri,
middle, and inferior.
interior, okay, inferior,
Sure.
seju koma, seju chima, seju oma. Tanda nganzu inferior ladi, sungal yores, takanda sumdi, damanigal yores, takanda. Tandop da, anatam damada, tanda nganzu, and dundop nigalia, this seju sumdi yodres.
So you can see in this view, so in the coronal view, you can see the superior, middle, and inferior frontal gyri.
Cheza anin dundop gi number so nanyen digi nanones, tanda seju koma, seju chima, seju omas, di tagana di yodres, di tongu yores, di nanole.
And it was the inferior frontal gyrus that was associated with spoken production.
Tadi ladi sambala tanda nganzu dundop gi seju oma digi nanolas. So karin dewa yore sidu sambala nganzu jeba trinye jorwa speech production che jorwa o di di nanola sandi gi yores.
And then in the temporal lobes, you can see here in the sagittal view, so here's the superior temporal gyrus here, middle temporal gyrus here, and inferior temporal gyrus here.
Cheza tanda nganzu shinsha gi namba ge tone ma ta indu sambala yanjo nganzu pige natab name nanola tanda nganzu seju koma je superior che tene ma seju tema lanare koma lanare tene ma chi seju che tene ma yang chi seju oma che taga na shinjik di nalo seva na shinjik taga na pige le o di pige yang di shinsha ge namba tone tadan derwa o di shagi yores.
So it's nice, it's easy with the colors. When you take the colors away, you can still see these three gyri. So the superior temporal, middle temporal, inferior temporal gyri.
Ta number so pena chashana nganzu sunda na ta yin sambala chida chigi tab debu dojun thong degu duwas kisin sunda meba yimba yina ya nganzu thanda di nadum damme ge seju khoma seju chima dine ma seju woma che shama che o di thong thugu yores.
And there is one relatively small but important gyrus that is actually embedded in the lateral fissure that we can see in this view here. And we can see, oh, go ahead.
Okay. Ta number so yanjo chi khari yore sidu sambala tanda nganzu dige ge nanola seju chi gyan chi chunga dawji ke chembu yanjo chi yores di khari sidu sambala tanda nganzu lateral fusion sidu sambala shogi sub jorwa digi nanola tanda nganzu embedded che da kana nanola chandi yu so dawde cha di yores.
And you can see this gyrus here that kind of goes deep right here. It kind of like here is the superior temporal gyrus, and then there's this branch that goes deep inside the fissure here, and you can see it right here.
Ta dile de sambala number so pena chashana dinema seju jungu duas dig yaga zondo waji tanda nganzu subgi nangwele yan zundu joji subgi nangwele yan zundu joji dinanola tongu duas on di seju di chadi yores.
Does anybody know what the function of this gyrus is?
Ta number so kyoran so puchoga ina da dig hagu yus chile di chile da hagu yusa seju dig chile hagu yusa. Ke koalemba kaba bejudan lada kumindo ke garsa ke koalensa
고서지와
warnisakla
고서지와
koalensa okay koalensa some of them said this is some sort of warning area where the brain is which is responsible to comprehend the language statements.
So it's related to that, but it's even more basic. So it is the primary auditory cortex. called Heschel's
primary
gyrus.
okay. Then Java yores Java yorte ine ya dizo karicha degi yores di sambala number so tandang anzu ani tuzo yorwa tuzo ngarim ge lenshun cha degi yores ta zo ro jin tuzo ngarim ge lenshun primary zo ro yorwa on di tuzo ge lenshun cha degi yores.
But that answer was close to a region that is posterior to it. So here is Heschel's gyrus, and posterior to it, it is thought to be associated with understanding spoken language, so spoken comprehension.
Chezan da number zo dig lenda tha nyibu doji khar chage yores di sambala digi gyabgi ngwen chu diche erwa posterior chu imba che digi ani zo di khar re sidu sambala sakhu di lebe nigu di zo khar la ba imba ina ani nganzo thanda di ke ki chu khodan le jorwa on zo di dan dewa cha digi yores.
And I mention these in part because it is one kind of a fundamental concept for how the brain is organized, that you will have primary regions associated with, say, motor processing for the face, and then you will have higher level regions associated with more complex functions, and they tend to be adjacent to each other.
Cheza da zo di number so di shugue zo khar chage yores ko to di shugue di khar jin chage yores di sambala pena cha cha tangbong anzu ani pige ngarim gi pige la ani chigi yo ba che pena cha cha di na la nganzu yonggu di che tene yang chi yonggu da chi nyunzi chesa yoshin jo di chi chage yo wa da ga na shin de li ya tan nganzu ani zo gi ani khar se gore resolution sa da amanda de che ani ngarim de che di thili jo de che di ri sambala ani zo che ge ngarim gi te da ani ya tine ma teletis nyunzi yoshin jo gi ani nyunzi chingi chele dan dewa yoshin jo gi lebi sagu jor wa dini ni adjacent chig thili yo din jo do sik an tine cha de gi res.
And so if you damage Heschel's gyrus, you on both sides, you won't be able to hear anything. But if you
okay, dil de zambala pena cha chanan dan kyoran zo tanji ani pige sug nano le yeshin jogi tanda nganzo seju jo as di sho ani domche niga gi ani seju di thola chimba yimba ina ani kyoran ge keja mo dam de chone komutung e chandu go res.
But if you damage other areas that are process more complex information, you still may be able to hear some things, but not others. For instance, back here, you would have difficulty understanding spoken language, but you might be able to hear birds chirping perfectly fine.
That deal with somebody that dig and so then to so ngarim gir tele chaya nyunzi chembu nyunzi chevigi any chigi nizu ani jurim chirim lensa gi lebi sagu dawjilia anan thola chimba yimba inas tin nanola nedan dig nanola khurangi pena chashana da khashi khoya kotu yigires kotu yigirete yan chigi khwalwen dawjorwa khwalwen gin chimbe yan chigi nizu khashi jili ani dele ma to batende ani khoda khoya dinde yongde batende gi nedan cha de res.
Okay. So there's a few more structures I want to mention. Although in the frontal and temporal lobes, you have the superior, middle, inferior for both gyri, for both of those. In the parietal, you just have the superior and the inferior parietal lobule.
Ani tando enjo number zola chashe khashi ji shuye ji las ani tanda nganzu ndundop ta ani nandop ni de ya tanda nganzu seju ani chi koma da kima da ani tanda nganzu shama sin sum yores niga le yobarete ine ya tsundop le keje she yindu tsambala tsundop la tanda nganzu gi seju de koma da shama de ma to ani ki gi seju di ta main sar ta dinini ma de yomares.
And then in the very posterior region of the brain, we have the occipital cortex or the occipital lobe. And we know what the primary function of this is.
That number so any nganzu gi lebe gi jamngwe ne dos phate indi zambala ani nganzu del khari thong thogu yore sit zambala ani nganzu phige ani tangdap chadu yora 딜레디 삼발라 디기 아니 지기 첼레조 카르카리 이메 남바즈 하고 US 디다 동조 yes visual system.
Yes. Right. And so this is the primary visual cortex. This is in this area right here.
다 디조 카르차데기 요레시디 삼발라 아니 동조 린슈 차데기 요레스 단당아주 파디나 통데바디.
And so right in this medial portion, and then the visual information will project up dorsally to the primary cortex, to the dorsal stream, or ventrally to the ventral stream.
제자 델레디 삼발라 디 키기 차디네마 조디 에니 튼조체 드네마 아니 양치기 이게라 도솔 시디 삼발라 아니 단당아주 겹다 ventral 시디 삼발라 둥기 드네파 아니 스트림 시기 요레 시디 삼발라 다 간다 아니 주위 요레 세선도식.
And so we can take a look through the visual. So starting from the eyes, actually here, we can take a look at the information coming into the brain here's the optic nerve coming off from the eyes.
아니 디네 간주 넘버즈 페나차샤나 간주 미유에서네 아니 피게 아니 레비 겹 받은 간주 딱체 페나차샤나 아니 지금 레반네 달레션 요도 체디 아니 피게 아니 단단 간주 한 동사 조라 믹사 조라 optic nerve 조라 디네 아니 피게 레바다 칸데 두고 예메 도시네 다투고 요레스.
And we can see the optic nerve projecting back from the eyes and projecting through the brain back to the lateral geniculate nucleus, so part of the thalamus. So it projects back here.
다디네 간주 가르 통투고 요레시디 삼발라 아니 간주 미네 단단 간주 믹자디 도스파나 디고 요바테다 안 디네 마 간주 아니 체지 랑에 린슈인도 비라기 요 체지 랑에 린슈시디 삼발라 디 아니 피게라 조 아니 지기 리부기 아니 차시 콘스토네 안 리부 오메기 차시 콘도 도댕에 덴데기 차시 차디기 요레스.
And then from there it projects via optic radiations, so a bunch of white matter projections to the primary visual cortex that I just mentioned.
제자 디네초 아니 남바서 카체지 때윤데 잠발라 단당간조 아니 캬제다 아니 디네 아니 단당간조 안 통조게 린슈 예사 딜레 두고도 와스타 미네 파도스 데제 안드로바임바이나.
And then the information doesn't stop there, it keeps going. And so here is just basic information, but if you want to process more complex things such as faces or written words, it actually a lot of the information or some of it projects more ventrally and leads into another gyrus on the list called the fusiform gyrus.
다딜레드 잠발라 아니 단당간조 아니 지금 니주도 데일은 조와 다가라는 디기 아니 지금 삼조 체기 요르스는 디 체기 요 말레스 단도 디네야 아니 지기 니주 아니 뇽지 체와기 텐덴도고 요바 이마이나 안 디네 아니 야 피게레 단당간조 숲기 세주 텐데기 주시네 파 안도시네 야 지금 뇽지 체야기 페나차샤나 지금 보드 티 지금 펜수지 랍송 왔단다 이게 And so
you can see the fusiform gyrus here, and it's kind of violet in colors. There's the gyri. And so if you damage these gyri, you tend to have difficulties with complex visual processing, such as, especially with, say, faces in the right hemisphere.
제가 데레드 잠발라 페나차시나 아니 세주디게 남바속 아니 큐엔도 쇼와 임바이나 아니 치기 통수던 제베기 아니 뇽지 쟁기 니주 페나차시나 직 동기 남바 임바이나레 야직 페이스디 잠발라 야직 아주 주 공네 콘돈 페이지 드레저와 딜라기나 다 간다 오 디주체디 델라니 타다 레모토 출란두고 요레스.
Again, bringing in this idea that there are very primary areas like the primary visual, where if you destroy the primary visual cortex, you won't be able to see practically anything. But if you destroy these more complex, higher level areas, You will be able to see some things, but not others.
제가 딜레드 삼발라데 단지는 시제 남바조 가르차기 요레스디 삼발라 아니 간주치기 도존 리슌 코랑아리긴 도존 리슌 코란란 톨라 침바 임바이나 남바조 아니 간주치기 미기 토네 체카한 통마동이 차기 요레스 임바이나야 디네야 체기 뉴지 윤조기 뉴지 찡기 체림단 대화 요신조기 안지기 차시 페나 차시나 비긴 둥기 세규도 조텔 톨라 침바 임바이나 아니 안 남바조 치기 같이 카시진 통토기 요와체 양디 딱다시 뉴지진도 조텔 딱단 주마투아 어딘데 차기 요레스 단지도 집어넣으래도.
So I think that's a good point to stop to see if there are any questions. I could go kind of on and on about a lot, but I think it's good to see if there are any questions, and then we can discuss lesions after the break.
Okay. 제가 다 딜레드 삼발라 다 넘버 단다 두즈도 차샤와 임바이나 안델은 삼주 체제 넘버 조라 안 직 지와 유메직다 안 지와 유바이나 간주 디간로 추두치 디 제리아 아니 간주 파징 제리아 단다 간주 레벨 냠주인 총야 주로 리진데 주 메이저 포션 주로 안 든조 콜야 안 커미션 디기어레스 안 디치 넘버 조라 지와 유나스 Yeah, TYU. Okay. Group number table number 3.
Tandang also the semyon da dewa egi tanda the anterior cingulate cortex lejida ACC. Di any color da di chile do di da teda ani tandang also mancha tanda semyon da dewa jide prefrontal cortex koran gachi da. Da di samik dozer such a chasa do di. Under
the anterior cingulate cortex lembe.
ACC lay
ACC, okay. So for the emotion, maybe anterior cingulate anterior cingulate karingo cortex. Okay, anterior cingulate cortex seems to be some sort of responsible for generation of the emotions. So what is the specific location of that, anterior cingulate cortex in the brain? Okay.
So as I mentioned, here is the corpus callosum. So this is the big white matter tract connecting the two hemispheres. In the middle of the medial portion of the brain, just the cortex just around the cingulate or the corpus callosum is the cingulate gyrus or cingulate cortex.
다 넘버조 카르레 시디 삼발라 단당한주 아니 디나로라 아니 간주 사슈니체 사슈인디 조 언니 레비기 dom시니기 버로긴 투잔라고데체 디기 두시네 촌 코라 잡션 주조르와스 दिल खारे योरे सिद्धि संभाला तंदंगा जो सिंगुलेट कोटे सिद्धि संभाला चिंता लेशुन लगी हुआ वो दिन चिंता लेशुन दी इन खवाल योरे लावा इंबाइना चिंता लेशुन दी तंदा अनंगा जो सशुन की दूसने अन जबलों ने अन कोरा जने योरेस.
And then the anterior portion, there's no super clear delineation, but it is around this anterior curve of the C-shaped structure of the corpus callosum. So it'll be in this anterior portion of the whole cingulate cortex. You can see the cingulate encompasses this whole red region, but you have anterior, middle, and then posterior cingulate. So anterior is the anterior portion of that.
Okay. ता दी नानो अने गांजो चिकी येंसम दे सेबु शिराम मिंदु सरवा ता यिंबा इने या सो खारे सिदु संबाला थांदा गांजो अने सेशुन गिंदुंगु गिने इसरवा तिने या ते इंदु संबाला अन दुजु ते खाजन चिंदा छादे गियोरेस तिरंग गाजन चिंदा देले या अन दुइंदा अने कीदा गैप सने अन गैप गिन चिंदा सने दुसिने अने योरेस चिंदा लेशु.
And then I believe there was somebody mentioned the prefrontal cortex. Any question?
So he was saying the prefrontal cortex also some sort of responsible for the emotion. Is it the case?
Yes, so it's thought to be important in especially like emotional regulation. So having kind of this top down, so we're not automatically responsive to all of our emotional, to all of our feelings. And so the prefrontal is thought to be important for that. And
제자 딜레비 잠발라 단당 먼저 prefrontal cortex 디 잠발라 아니 지금 dun동응기 륜슈세야 손러부지와 어디 아니 단당 간조 세뇽기 조 땅진 체조와 세뇽 땅지 레귤러 체조와 도담 땅지 체조와 온 딥차기요레스 제가 간조 치 갈라워레 치기 세뇽레 인디 잠발라 코야 치 랑구기 토네 레망부실레 로기와와 다 땅진 체사디 조디 단단 통종응기 륜슈차인 근dun도 ngwengi lenshu chagi yoba in songsa di ya nga zu ke chenbu cha de yores.
And it's so one idea is that some regions are very easy to identify just by looking at where they are in the brain. In terms of, for instance, the cingulate is very easy to find if you can find the corpus callosum, right?
Da diladi sambala ani nganzo lebe chashi kashi jig yang ko ngunzi chudi sambala ngunzi chele la ushibi jores ani pa tawa da namsang khora ani ngunzi chito eso do jores pena chashina tanda nganzo chingda gi keje sheba yimba ina chingda linshu de keje sheba yimba ina ani tanda dig na no la ani kyoran so gi sashun di thongsa be jele ya ani namsang khora ani chingda gi lishun jorwa odi ani namsa pa tawa da ani sebu chine thongtu gres.
And the motor cortex is easy to find if you can find the central sulcus. So we know where the primary motor cortex is.
다가는 신지긴 간주 페나 차샤나 아니 지기 구주기 레슌던 데와도 차샤바 임바이나 아니 안 징문진 레라우 차기 요레스 가르친 레시디 삼발라 켜랑기 아니 단당 간주 센트럴 안 sulcus 삼발라 키수주와 기수디 하고 사회질 안 디기티들 단당 간주 모터 코르스다 아니 ngaring기 모터 가사 구주기 레슌던 주테디 요와 온디 응양 것이기 문진 레라우도 차티기 요레스.
And then we know that the premotor cortex is just anterior to the primary motor cortex. And that's where we have these higher level motor commands and codes.
제가 당한주 아니 저기 아니 ngarim기 아니 갈소고래 구주 레슌 하고 사베젤이야 아니 디간주 아니 premotor cortex 삼발라 아니 저기 ngujuingi ani lenshun se sondro bujirwa o di thagara ani ngarimgi ngujugi thi thagara dil yorwas ingyu zo ding nanola ta chig shele nguju dan jebegi yan chig nyunzi chawegi shele la dan jewa yoshin jogi lebi sagudi chade gi yorwas ta de ngusun le la uchagi yore la yorda.
And just and anterior to the premotor cortex is the prefrontal cortex, but the division is not as clear with anatomy. And so we have to think of those things more as functionally defined regions. But generally speaking, it goes motor, premotor, prefrontal as you go from the posterior to anterior.
Okay. 제가 다 딜러처리 삼발라 단당 아주 내가 지금 삼로 가르다 초고 요래 수디 삼발라 아니 아주 premotor 수디 삼발라 아니 단당 아주 ngu중ing기 린슌기 Dulas, Carriores de Zambala, and prefrontal cortex chalres, prefrontal cortex de Zambala, and Dundung Gilinsu charwas. The in the Zambala, Zanchik, Samlogotone, Chelegotone, Achik, so Ane Munzice, Lela Undovjores, Chita, Dinigi, premotor cortex, prefrontal cortex nigi, Ane Chik Sansam Dov, Yensam Jorwa, the Ane Pige, Quebagotone, and Stebushra, Jetuya Yomares.
A good time for a break, and then we can, if there are any questions, we can address those after.
아니 트와 있는 트와 단로치스 네 간조니 파신 레는 리기어레스
단도 디지털 디 MRI 스케그 레벨 따지죠. 레벨 온사 레레레 냠찬로는데 따투고 야나메나스 온사 깡치리치레 톨라토나.
So his question is that when you use the MRI machine to map the brain during that time, will you able to see the damage or the lesions of every single neurons in the brain of the brain?
So yeah, we can, first when we're actually acquiring data in the scanner, we can take a look at the image, and only what we can see with our eyes can we, can we kind of note damage? There might be damage there that we can't see with our eyes, and I'll actually show you an image of that after the break. But it's not. It's also not just the eyes. It's also the experience. So there are specialists who have, are very good at seeing these that a novice might not be able to see with the same image.
Ta dil di sambala chidang nganzo karre sidi sambala ani leba mata indi sambala chidang nganzo ani chegi leba la tanda mejin po yume se de nyamgui dro yume se de tambu di cha de yores ani nyamgui dro yume se de di ani gel lobsen din la keji shares ani mata indi sambala ta de yang khora ge misi ge tse dro gu yora sawa ji gi ta wa ina ta ma thu ye jig da yang khora dil zu nyamnyu gi experience di ke chimbu cha yung yorwa o di gi thone yang ani ke chimbu cha gi yores ta khanda mejin po ya dan jewa yushin di gengi jeg lobsen na insar. Okay.
Okay.
Tea break. Okay.
Yes. Tea break.
Mm-hmm.